Welcome in. Week 15 is in the books. We're wrapping it up here on the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer, YouTube edition. We're going to jump right into the news. You guys know how this works. We get to 5 news topics off the top of the show. Then I answer all of your questions up there on Periscope. You guys can get this on Periscope live every Tuesday morning. Also, a little later in the day, the produced version by my buddy Will Pyle will go up, and it'll be up on iTunes. So you can consume this in a bunch of different ways, as those who've been following know. News item number 1, we're going to start with the obvious news item, and that's the one that everybody was talking about coming out of Sunday, which was the Jesse James catch at the end of the New England Steelers game, which wound up not being a catch. And I'm going to make this real simple. You know, we all, and I'm sure most of the people up here on Periscope, listening on iTunes, watching on YouTube, most of you played football in the backyard growing up, played football in recess growing up, and I don't remember having a whole lot of arguments over what is and isn't a catch. And, you know, I think it's one of those things, you know it when you see it. When you watch what Jesse James did in that game, on that 1st and 10, I believe it was, right? It was 1st and 10 after the long throw to Juju Smith-Schuster. That was a catch. In fact, if you watch the explanation from Al Riveron, the senior vice president of officiating, that went up on Twitter on Sunday night, he actually says Ben Roethlisberger completes the pass to Jesse James. So what's the problem? Well, to me, the problem is that we have become way too worried about having black and white answers. And because we're way too worried about having black and white answers, the NFL has covered its ass in these sorts of situations where there are subjective factors. Okay? It's really easy to throw something like survive the ground in the rule to make it black and white for the officials. What's wrong with making that subjective? What's wrong with making that rule at the judgment of the officials? What's wrong with going back to what it was in the 80s, where the rule was if you catch the ball and take a step, then it's a catch? What's wrong with that? Well, back in the 80s, the problem was that guys would get lit up. But we have so many rules that protect the guys anyway now that I don't think it would be an issue in today's NFL. Guys aren't getting lit up that way anymore. And I don't think it would. There are other rules that protect the players in those situations to make it so that's not as much of a factor. And I just think we have to use common sense in these situations. Calvin Johnson in 2010, that was a catch. Des Bryant in the 2014 playoffs, that was a catch. And Jesse James on Sunday night, that was absolutely a catch. It was so much a catch that he caught the ball, had enough control of it to land on his knees, turn, and lunge to the goal line. If you're not controlling the ball, you can't do those things. And so this is really simple. A 9-year-old could figure it out. A 9-year-old knows what a catch looks like. And so the officials should know what a catch looks like. And so let the officials have the power to decide. Put something subjective in their hands. Everything doesn't need to be objective. Everything doesn't need to be black and white. We've become so worried about covering our asses in these situations and giving all of the officials an out. Put it on them. I don't think that there's any problem with that. I don't have any problem with making this a subjective thing. It doesn't need to be. Everything doesn't need to be objective. There can be some judgment involved. These are, on paper, the most qualified officials in the football world, in the sport. So they should be able to judge. They should be able to make a judgment call in those situations. And we shouldn't give them outs in those situations that create endings like we had the other night. Okay, number 2. The way that game ended, look, a lot of people are going to say the Patriots have horseshoes up their ass, right? But I'm going to point out 2 things that happened down the stretch of that game. 2 elements to the end of that game, to the last 4 minutes of that game. And we're going to go from when Gostowski kicked the field goal, 46 yards out, to the final gun. That I think explains the difference between the Patriots and everyone else. okay? In those final 4 minutes, now Antonio Brown's off the field, so there's no question who the Steelers' number one offensive weapon is. It's LeVeon Bell. The Patriots' number one offensive weapon, without question, especially now that Julian Edelman's been out, Julian Edelman's on injured reserve, is Rob Gronkowski. So what happens in the last 4 minutes of the game? Well, in the last 4 minutes of the game, the Patriots force the Steelers to play left-handed. They say, you know what? You can beat us with anybody else. Our front seven's a mess. Our secondary's talented but has had its issues. But you know what? LeVeon Bell's not going to beat us. And he didn't. LeVeon Bell had 1 carry for 1 yard in the last 4 minutes of that game. This is a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. You can get the ball to him in a number of different ways. And it wasn't that the Steelers didn't want to get him the ball. It's that the Patriots took that away. And they said, you're going to have to go somewhere else. And the Steelers damn near did beat them with other people. The Steelers damn near did beat them with Juju Smith-Schuster. The Steelers damn near did beat them with Jesse James. I mean, Smith-Schuster was so close to picking up that first down. On the first possession, then on the second possession, he had the 69-yard catch and run. But that's basically what the Patriots said in that situation. You know what? If you can beat us with the other guys, good. But we're not going to let Bell beat us. On the other side, I'm going to read you the first 4 plays of New England's possession here. Only possession in the last 4 minutes here, okay? Not counting the kneel down at the end. 1st and 10 from the New England 23. Tom Brady, pass incomplete short middle to Rob Gronkowski. 2nd and 10 from the New England 23. Tom Brady, pass deep middle to Rob Gronkowski to the New England 49 for 26 yards. 1st and 10, New England 49. Tom Brady, pass to Rob Gronkowski for 26 yards. 1st and 10, Pittsburgh 25. Tom Brady, pass deep right to Rob Gronkowski for 17 yards. My producer, Will Piles, over here shaking his head because he thinks it's really annoying. And it is. It would be. If you're rooting for anybody else, you'd be yelling at the top of your lungs. Do everything you can to take them away. Make Danny Amendola and Brandon Cooks and Dion Lewis and James White beat you. Don't let Rob Gronkowski beat you. And that's the difference. Right? The Patriots wouldn't let the Steelers get the Patriots were not going to let LeVeon Bell beat them in the last 4 minutes of that game. And the Steelers did let Rob Gronkowski beat them. The Patriots make you play left-handed. The Steelers do what they do. And I think that was the difference in the last 4 minutes of the game. The other difference is Ben throwing the ball into the middle of the field and not knowing the situation well enough and not understanding, well, I got 2 guys in the backside of this play. They're not running routes. They're just standing there. So now the guys who are on them are peeling off, and one of the guys actually wound up with the interception, and I'm going to throw it into traffic to try to make a play. The Patriots don't always win in those situations, but you rarely see them do something stupid like that. And so I just think when you look at the end of that game, yes, there's some luck involved, but the last 4 minutes of that game, I think 2 things that separate the Patriots from a lot of other teams came up. The Patriots are going to make it hard on you because they're going to make you beat them with something else, something that's not the best thing you do. And there aren't enough teams that do that. And number 2, they're not going to do something stupid at the end. And that's why I would say a good 60 to 70% of their wins are basically waiting for the other team to fuck it up. So there you have it. Patriots are probably going to wind up with the number 1 seed. I don't know if anybody's going to wind up beating them in Foxborough. But I think if you go to Vegas right now, and I haven't been to the sites this morning, I would say the Patriots are probably a pretty heavy favorite to get to their 8th Super Bowl with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. Okay. Number 3, the consistency in suspensions across the NFL is becoming a huge problem. And look, I know Thomas Davis has previous history. I know that 2-game suspension is probably getting appealed down to 1. Fine. I get it. I understand what Thomas Davis did to Devontae Adams, who has had an incredibly rough year because he was also the target of the hit from Danny Trevathan earlier in the year. I understand you got to protect that player in that situation. It's just hard to amend other plays with the way that this one is being legislated. Okay, you've got that. Then there's the Iloka and Smith-Schuster plays on the Monday night in Cincinnati. Those guys both get a game there. Okay, then you've got the Rob Gronkowski situation, which was, I think about as egregious as it gets. You could see him pause, line the guy up, and give him a forearm to the back of the head. He gets a game for that. So that's outside of the context of play. Okay, you've got Rob Gronkowski is penalized for doing something outside the context of play. Smith-Schuster, Iloka, borderline. Iloka's was reduced to a fine. They get penalized because it was an ugly night for the NFL. That Monday night game between the Steelers and the Bengals. Thomas Davis gets 2 games because he is a repeat offender. And yet Michael Bennett didn't get any penalty at all for what he did against the Jaguars on Sunday the 10th. Went after the guy's knees. The guy went to defend himself. He ran up behind him, brought him to the ground. Leonard Fournette ran to the guy's defense. He winds up getting a $12,000 fine. It's hard to look at this now and look at these different things, and you look at the Michael Bennett thing, and it was an ugly situation for the NFL. He's a repeat offender, and it was outside the context of play. So all 3 of those things happened, all 3 of those elements that kind of led to the penalties to Iloka, Smith-Schuster, Gronkowski, and Davis were in play with Bennett. And I can't think of any other explanation than the NFL scared of Bennett. It just feels that way. I may be wrong. It feels to me like the NFL is scared of Michael Bennett. Okay, number 4. I'm going to give you 2 teams to watch going forward here, going into Week 16, Week 17. 2 teams that I think have a chance to get really hot. The first one is the Cowboys. And it may be a little obvious, but I think that bringing Zeke back into the fold, I think they really benefit from the 6 weeks without him. Because there was that comfort zone they were in with Zeke where they're constantly in 2nd and 6. They're constantly in 3rd and 2. That changed everything for Dak Prescott. That changed everything for everybody in for their other skill position players. For their offensive line, too. You're not going to see all these different looks because you're not in long yardage a lot. And so now those guys had to go out and operate in those situations. And on the drive that wound up winning the game, Dak makes a play on 3rd and 10 to Jason Witten against the Raiders. On 4th and 1, Dak converts. Dak makes the play for 40 yards down the sideline to Dez Bryant. Dak had to make plays at the end of the Raider win because Zeke Elliott wasn't out there. And Dez is still really good, but Zeke's the only true game changer they have. And so now Dak has had to go out there and operate in a different environment for 6 weeks. And it was ugly for the first 3 weeks. But they grew, and they got better, and they come out of it 3-3, and they're 8-6, and they need Atlanta to collapse. So maybe we won't even see them in the playoffs. They absolutely need Atlanta to collapse. But I like them going into an elimination game this week against Seattle. And I like the potential for what they're going to look like over the next 2 weeks. Okay, over in the AFC, it's interesting. I think we've sort of forgotten about the Chiefs, and rightfully so. They looked awful for a stretch of almost 2 months. They start 5-0. They lose 6 of 7. A lot of people blamed Alex Smith. And it wasn't really him. And I've talked to people in that building who've told me that he was playing the best football of his career. The difference was the running game. Everything Andy Reid had built the team to be this year was based in the running game. And when we saw it early on with the spread concepts, and then once defenses started to catch up to some of that stuff, the Chiefs had to learn to counterpunch. I think they've learned to counterpunch. Okay? Kareem Hunt, who was fantastic at the beginning of the year, he was never going to keep up that pace. That was impossible. It was impossible for anybody to keep up that pace. So he was never keeping up that pace. But he winds up going for 174 yards on 32 carries against the Chargers in a have-to-have-it game on Saturday night. And that's just part of a larger theme here with the Chiefs, where if you look at where they're at, and I'm going to pull up the numbers now, during their 5-0 start, they rushed for 156.2 yards per game. During their 1-6 stretch, they averaged 81.4 rush yards per game, so that's about half. In the last 2 weeks, 165 against the Raiders, 174 against the Chargers. Alex Smith was never the problem. Alex Smith is fine. Now, I'm not saying he's going to carry your team, but that team has been built around the run game. And so having Alex Smith in there, like having the run game going changes everything for Alex Smith. So internally, they felt like Alex is playing the best ball of his career. It's just when the run game wasn't there, he kind of regresses to what he's been over the course of his career. And you see the ceiling there. When the run game's rolling like it has been the last 2 weeks, he looks like a different player. And I hate to break this to you, but that goes for most quarterbacks. Like most quarterbacks, if things are working around them, they look pretty good. If things aren't working around them, then maybe less so. It's not that complicated. Number 5, the big story this week, all the credit in the world to John Wertheim to have a story come out on Sunday morning and have the Panthers announce that Jerry Richardson selling the team within hours is absolutely amazing. So great work by him and the team here at Sports Illustrated on the story exposing the workplace environment in Charlotte that led to at least 4 complaints of sexual harassment that were later settled. For those that don't understand what that means, basically, normally that means you're paying to have those go away. And there were racial elements to the story. There was, some really creepy stuff, like asking to shave girls' legs, asking for foot massages, all of this weird-ass stuff. And so this has got a couple elements to it. One, the NFL has to continue to investigate this. They don't have much of a choice because I think they would get called on it pretty quickly based on the environment in our country right now if they didn't. And so I would think that if there's any situation where you are going to be calling, like they brought in Bob Mueller for Ray Rice. They brought in outside counsel to handle the Richie Incognito situation, which was asinine. So you would think that if they're going to take those that seriously, they should take this one that seriously too, even though some of the news value of the story was taken away when the Panthers decided, when Jerry Richardson announced he's going to sell the team because he's not going to be the owner anymore. The second element to this that I think is really interesting is what happens to the team now. And, I look at the valuations of the teams in the NFL, and I don't think we're going to see too many stories like Jerry Jones buying the Cowboys for whatever it was, $80 million and winding up with a property worth more than almost $5 billion. Robert Kraft buying the Patriots, I think it was for $140 million, and winding up with a team that's valued at $3.7 billion. Those guys got in at the right time. I think it's going to be really interesting to see now what happens with this team being sold because they're not in New York, they're not in L.A., they're not in Dallas, they're not in Chicago, they're in Charlotte, which is a bottom half of the league market from a size perspective. The team owns the stadium, so there's always the potential they could leave because there's not a lease there, but I can't imagine Richardson would want to do that to his legacy. I know how important his legacy is to him, and he has to know how much damage that would do to his legacy if he's talked about what a crowning achievement it was to bring NFL football to the Carolinas and then turn around and sell the team to somebody who's going to move them. But I think the price tag is going to be really interesting because you look right now at the Forbes valuations, and 27 of the 32 teams are worth $2 billion or more. The Panthers are right in the middle. They're in the bottom half, but they're like the upper part of the bottom half at $2.3 billion. And so I think there's a fair question to ask: is an NFL team a good investment now? Because obviously, when Bob Kraft bought the Patriots, Jerry Jones bought the Cowboys, it was an incredible investment. Even when Arthur Blank bought the Falcons, and this is probably 15 years ago now, great investment. The more recent owners, Jimmy Haslam buying the Browns, Terry Pagula buying the Bills, I think it's easy to question the investment there. So it's easy for us to look at the numbers and say, well, they should get $2.3 billion, whatever it says on Forbes. But it usually doesn't work that way. You're only worth as much as somebody's willing to pay you. And so the team's only worth as much as somebody's willing to pay for it. So it'll be interesting to see what the team goes for. I'm going to answer all of your questions now, so you guys can fire away there on Periscope. I'm looking right at you, right there. Any questions you have. With the looks of it, Belichick McDaniels deserve a ton of credit for developing Jimmy G. Absolutely they do. Some have enough money where they don't care if they get a huge return. Steve Ballmer didn't. That is true, but I don't know if there's anybody like that in Charlotte. The name to watch here is James Goodnight. He's the only person in the Carolinas who is on the Forbes 500 or Forbes 400. He's worth $8.9 billion. The other thing that's important to note here, I see a lot of people who don't really understand how rich you need to be to buy one of these teams. Like the point of entry is probably a net worth of about $5 billion if you're going to be the primary owner. And if you look at the Forbes 400, which I took a look at yesterday, there's only 121 Americans who would qualify under that criteria. So there aren't very many people who are wealthy enough to buy a team. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. More questions. What do you think of Schiano as DC of the Patriots if Patricia gets a head coaching gig? That actually makes some sense. Why? And Ohio State is hiring a new assistant coach who is Washington State's DC. Alex Grinch is coming over from there. So maybe there's some movement there that would make it so that could happen. I think it's more likely that Brian Flores would be promoted. Duffy ownership, not sure. Hugh still coaching in Cleveland next year. I think that's 50-50. No, not Diddy for the Panthers. No, not Diddy for the Panthers. With the head coaching change coming in Cincinnati, is Andy Dalton's job in jeopardy? Yeah, sure it is. He's not entrenched in the way that, a Cam Newton or an Aaron Rodgers or even a Derek Carr would be. So certainly questions there. Anyway, O'Brien doesn't survive in Houston. I don't think that's the right way to word it. I think there's a good chance that there's a divorce there. And I think there's a good chance that O'Brien winds up somewhere else. Now there's going to be big spenders in free agency. Certainly they've got $100 million. I think that they will. Thoughts on Nick Foles. I think Foles looked great on Sunday in the second half of that game. Details on Richardson racism. Well, there was some stuff most of the stuff was 20 to 25 years old at least. A lot of it stemmed from the way that he ran his old companies. There were some anecdotes from Denny's in there and some of the restaurant chains that he ran. Obviously, that still doesn't absolve him from criticism there. We saw what happened to Donald Sterling. A lot of the things that Donald Sterling was criticized for were very, very old. He was still forced to sell the team. There was one instance of a racial slur being directed at a scout, which was more recent, but most of the stuff was older. All right, we're going to do like 5 more minutes of questions, so bring them. Raiders firing Del Rio or just OC or DC. Possible Fangio to the Raiders. I don't think Fangio to the Raiders is impossible. I think that there is a good chance there's a staff shakeup there. Because they just gave him an extension, I have trouble seeing Mark Davis eating a lot of years in the contract unless there's some sort of huge name out there for him, like a John Gruden or somebody like that. Otherwise, I think that the more likely conclusion here is that there's a shakeup on the staff. What days are you on with Zoe and Bertrand? Thank you for promoting the show. I'm on tomorrow. Fangio option with the Niners. I think Fangio was Kyle Shanahan's first choice last year, but I think Robert Saleh's done a good job there where the job would not be available to him. I think Fangio would like to return to the Bay Area. Who coaches the Jets next year? I think it's still Todd Bowles. Baker Mayfield's draft stock now. I will have a mock draft up in the next day or so. Baker Mayfield's a first-round pick, I believe. Not a high first-round pick, but I think he's bottom of the first round. Foles, Wentz share MVP. I don't think so. I think Tom Brady's winning the MVP. Vikings quarterback situation next year. I'm guessing there's going to be some sort of Band-Aid contract done with Case Keenum. More attractive job, Bears or Bucks. I think the Bucks, just because I believe in the quarterback a little bit more in Tampa than I do believe in the quarterback in Chicago. I think Jameis Winston, when we saw it last night, still has plenty of upside. Jags go deep in the playoffs. I still don't fully trust Blake Bortles. John Fox out, yes. Eagles defense, rough week. I think we can give them a mulligan. Highest, Quentin Nelson could go. I think there's a chance Quentin Nelson goes in the top 5. I think he is a better prospect than Zach Martin was coming out of Notre Dame at guard 3 years ago. Are the Miami Dolphins a playoff team with Tannehill? They were last year. Broncos quarterback next year. Cousins, I think Cousins would be in play with Denver if he is available. Should the Raiders fire their coach? The Raiders need a shakeup on the staff. There's been some issues internally there. NFC wildcard matchups right now look great. AFC not so much. Thanks for the comment. Top candidate for the Giants head coaching job. I still think someone with the Patriots could wind up there. And McDaniels or Patricia, I think both of them will be in the mix in New York, as will Nick Caserio. Not saying he would leave New England. I'm just saying he's somebody they're going to kick the tires on. Eli Manning leaves. I think there's actually a scenario where Eli Manning stays that makes a lot of sense because you've got him at about $16 million over the next 2 years, which is an affordable rate for a starting quarterback. You add on top of that $7.5 million for a top 3 pick, and that's still right around $24 million, what they'd be paying at that position. That's not unreasonable at all, considering what quarterbacks go for now. Let's answer 10 more questions. How about that? If the Panthers win the Super Bowl, will Richardson be handed the Lombardi Trophy? Would the NFL ban him? That's question number 1. The answer is no, they will not ban him. I think that they will allow him to go out on his terms. Number 2, who do you have for the Super Bowl this year? Get back to me in a couple of weeks. I'll just say this. I think it's going to be tough for anyone to win in Foxborough, and I think the Saints are as complete as they've been at any time in the Peyton Breeze era, and that includes the championship team. Number 3, will the Browns ever be good again? Sure, this is a big offseason for them. They've got 5 picks in the first 2 rounds, potentially 2 top 5 picks. I like the way the Browns set up going forward, and there are pieces there to build with. Christian Kirksey, Jamie Collins, Myles Garrett on defense. On offense, you got the interior of the offensive line with Bitonio, Zeitler, and Treader. Joe Thomas coming back. Josh Gordon, Duke Johnson. There are pieces there, and they've got a lot of capital. Again, 5 picks in the first 2 rounds, $100 million in cap space. Number 4, Falcons in the playoffs. I do think the Falcons are going to make the playoffs after watching them yesterday. And they can clinch that. It's hard to believe after everything they've been through, but they can clinch that this week if they can beat the Saints. Number 5, Gillislee to get Burkhead carries this week. I think Gillislee will be up because of the Burkhead injury. Number 6, were you surprised about the Rams and Seattle game? Yes, I was. I thought Seattle would come out with more fight than that. And I think what we saw is Seattle is becoming very reliant on Russell Wilson on offense, and the defense, the losing Sherman and Averill and Cam, I think it's finally hit a critical mass where it's really, really tough for them to hang on, especially because of the way that they've played for so long. The way Pete Carroll's defense sets up, he sets it up, it's not a complicated defense. He wants you to play fast, and you need athletes. And you take some pieces out of there, especially a unique athlete like Cam Chancellor, that changes everything. Question number 6, what's up with the Packers? And Aaron Rodgers does not play this week. I doubt Rodgers will play this week. I think the Packers need to do a better job of protecting him. I'm not the first person to say that. I thought they became a more complete team without him in there, and then they go out and they give up 31 points on the road to the Panthers and get eliminated from the playoff chase. So that shows what I know. Question number 7, what we got? Seahawks heading to a rebuild. This is going to be a year of transition coming up. I believe that, yes. Richard Sherman's contract is probably going to be guaranteed, so they'd have to trade him because he is not going to be able to pass a physical on the first day of the league year. But certainly the Earl Thomas contract situation is going to have to be addressed. Cliff Averill and Cam Chancellor's futures from a health standpoint are very uncertain. Michael Bennett's 32 years old. There are a lot of pieces on that defense where you look at them and you say, are they going to be there next year? Number 8, what are your thoughts on the Vikings? I think they are as complete a team as there is in the NFL, as complete a roster as there is in the NFL. They just need the clock to not strike midnight on Case Keenum. Number 9, Bills or Ravens in the playoffs. Let's go with the Ravens because the Bills have to play New England this week. And number 10, okay, should the Niners win the rest of their games? That's an interesting question. The Niners have, I believe, I got to look this up. The Niners play the Texans? No, they played the Texans already. The Jaguars. I knew it was an AFC South team. They play the Jaguars this week, the Rams next week. They could very easily lose both of those games. That would mean finishing the season at 4-12. I think that's the best case scenario for them. The best case scenario to me is like a couple of very competitive losses where you look good and the team continues to take steps. I mean, look, we can talk about how valuable the game experience is for a young team and a young program and all of that. I just 5 or 6 spots in the draft order matters, man. It really matters. And so I think the best case scenario for the Niners now is, if we're being honest about this, and Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch can't say this, but if we're being honest about it, I think the best case scenario for them is to have a couple of very competitive losses. They are in great shape. I mean, if you believe in Jimmy Garoppolo the way that I believe in Jimmy Garoppolo, having watched him, they've got the quarterback position taken care of. They've got a couple nice pieces on defense. They've got a ton of capital going forward. They've got 4 picks in the first 3 rounds of the draft. They're going to be picking high in each round, and they've got $100 million in cap space. So they're set up to get good over the next couple of years, and it all starts with making that trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, which I believe now was brilliant. Okay, thank you for coming in. I appreciate you guys coming out. I really value your feedback. So again, just get at me on Twitter at Albert Breer. You can leave any comment, good, bad, what you think of the job we're doing here, how we can make it better. You can also do that on Facebook. You can actually direct message me, or whatever you call it on Facebook. It's not direct message. You can, I don't know, whatever. You can message me on Facebook at Albert R. Breer. You can like my page there too. I appreciate you guys coming out. Be sure to check out the conventional podcast, our old school podcast with Gresh and Lou Pellegrino. That pops on Friday morning. And always, always, always remember to listen to the MMQB 10 Things podcast, the MMQB podcast with Peter King. And one more time, this podcast, the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer, both YouTube and old school edition. You can get us wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Same time next week. We'll see you guys then.